So I've been sitting on this topic for a little while because I didn't think that I had enough to say about it to fill up a whole video. It's been in my notes about potential future video topics, but today I realized that it actually bleeds over into a lot of other stuff. What am I talking about? Probably that thing that is the video title. Spell components is the note that I have. I keep a notepad with potential video topics, and the note that I have on there is just spell components. But actually, well, let's start with spell components. Spell components are kind of weird, right? This Seinfeld-esque observational comedy is hilarious. Well, how about them spell components? What's the deal with that? Spell components are an interesting reversion that 5th edition engages in. They were part of 3rd edition, and I kind of assumed that they were part of older editions that I have not played. But they went away in 4th, and then they came back in 5th. And today, I guess the other day, I was realizing that, like, it really restricts the freedom of players and GMs to reflavor things. Because think about this, the tiefling, and we're going to be talking about the tiefling quite a bit in this video because it brings up a lot of issues. The tiefling has racial spells. Most notably, because I think it's got like thaumaturgy as well, but most notably and classically, it's got Hellish Rebuke. By the same title, Infernal Wrath is the title of the ability in 4th edition. It's got Hellish Rebuke now. There's a couple of issues with this. First of all, and this is aside from the video topic, this is, I love how 5th edition just sort of casually steals the tiefling's unique thing and says, all right, this is a spell now, and other people get it. This is no longer a unique racial thing. You can do it, but other people can do it too. It's annoying. But imagine a tiefling, say a tiefling fighter. It's got a shield, a sword. They get hit. And they're like, I'm going to use my racial ability. Well, actually, you can't because it's a spell and therefore requires verbal and somatic components. Verbal components, usually not an issue. Somatic components, you have a sword in one hand and a shield in the other hand. You actually can't cast any spells without a feat to do so. You have to take a whole extra feat to use your racial ability unless you have a hand free all the time, aka unless you're a spellcaster. So that really spawned this thought that I had about how the existence of spell components really restricts flavor, because that means that every spell has to be hand wavy, chanting kind of a spell. However it is that you imagine someone casting a spell. Those are magic words. Those are magic enough. Abracadabra. It can't just be some other thing, and that's that's a big part of the issue with the Artificer, isn't it? Because they say reflavor your spells as like inventions and potions and whatnot, but you are still required to wave your hands and speak magic words to cast those spells, which means that they're not really reflavorable as other things. Imagine, I want to play a tiefling, a 4th edition tiefling. I could say, all right, well, I'm not really a tiefling. I'm a fire elemental person. Like, I don't want to be a genasi. I like tiefling better. It fits what I want to do mechanically. But like, I'm like an elemental person more than a devil person. So when I get hit, my fire that comes off of me is just like part of my body. It like literally splashes magma on the enemy. That's what's going to deal with fire damage. Cool. You don't have to change any mechanics to make that be a thing. But in 5th edition, no, you literally have to cast a spell. You must wave your hand and you must speak magic words to cast the spell. And it can be counterspelled. the existence, like making spells be their own thing and incorporating all of this like very specific and narrow flavor into the way that spells work is what actually restricts reflavoring. And this is a thing that I've known for a while, and I haven't really been able to articulate it until just now. Fourth edition really encourages reflavoring more than fifth edition. And it's been I've known that this is true for a long time, and I haven't really been able to put my finger on exactly why. But it's this kind of design where restrictions and requirements are all very specific for what it is in the game. So you can't really reflavor. Like, I want to have, like people talk about how if you want to play a really good fighter, just play a wizard and reflavor all your spells as various kinds of attacks, which only works so far to begin with. But even if you were wanting to do that, you still have to have a hand free to do somatic components. You still have to speak magic words, which is going to be audible. It's not going to work in a field of silence. Your stuff can still be counterspelled. These kinds of reflavorings aren't really possible in 5th edition like they were in 4th. And what's interesting is that I pointed out on Reddit, there was a discussion about tiefling abilities, and I pointed out that, like, don't forget, if you have both of your hands full, you actually can't use your racial spells. And someone's like, well, you can point with a sword in your hand. I was like, yes, but you can't perform somatic components if you are wielding a weapon in that hand. And they're like, well, that's why that rule is stupid, and that's why no one runs that. And I don't actually think that's true. I think most people do run components probably pretty close to as written. Aside from the few mechanical like details that I think a lot of people probably don't know. I think most people do run verbal and somatic components as written. Material components get a little bit tricky, but verbal and somatic are pretty straightforward. And I think most people do run those. But it's interesting to me that this Reddit user thought that, like, well, that's just stupid. Get rid of that as needed. And in a way, it's weird because I kind of agree, and I agree with the sentiment. I don't agree with the approach. Because the sentiment of, like, spell components are kind of dumb. Let's do without them. Sure, like on a high concept level, yes. I can definitely see getting rid of spell components. Especially because, like, they don't exist in 4th. They're clearly not necessary. But they were reintroduced to 5th sort of as a way to limit spell. Like, they're a token limit. Like, how often does it even come up that spells require components? I wager not very often. Less than once per campaign, I would think. But the existence of the spell components mechanics, both verbal and somatic and material components, these are all sort of indicators that the writers don't want you reflavoring spells, which means that the narrative and descriptive freedom of 5th edition is not what it was in 4th. It's much more locked down and restrictive. Because if you want to reflavor spells as literally anything else, you have to start changing rules. And then you're not reflavoring, you are house ruling. That's a different area of redesigning entirely. So, yeah. And this all came up, like, mainly with the tiefling, because they have racial abilities that became spells, which interferes with certain playstyles. And to me, it doesn't make sense at all. Hang on. I thirst greatly. To me, it doesn't make sense at all that a tiefling wouldn't be able to do that. Should you ignore the material and somatic component, or the verbal and somatic components for racial spells? I mean, like, that's probably not a hard thing to do. It's probably not going to ruin anything. It's not going to wreck anyone's day. But you shouldn't have to. Like, this idea that is very popular on Reddit, which is that, like, oh, well, the rules are kind of dumb. Ignore the rules. Play your own way. Sounds good in principle, but I did pay like $50 a book for this game. Why am I ignoring the rules? Why should I have to go through that much work? And this is not a case of like, oh, we accidentally wrote this thing too strong or too weak, and so we're gonna errata it to change it, or like, player has to errata it or change it, or this math doesn't quite work, so you have to adjust it a little bit. They tried and failed to make an algorithm that works. That happens in games all the time. Fully forgivable. The issue is that the writers clearly didn't really care about this, or they did it on purpose because they think that's what people want. And I don't think it's what people want. And it's certainly not what I want. And I think it's what a lot of people don't want. And this kind of comes back to my previous video where I talk about how a lot of people actually don't want to play 5th edition. They want to play other games, and they just don't realize it because they have no experience outside of that one game. But, I mean, like, I can't have every video wrap up like that, can I? I can't have every single video tie back to the fact that 5th edition is not the game most people want to play, even if they think that it is. So how else am I going to wrap up this video?